Hello, everybody. I am Hadar Susskind, the president and CEO of New Jewish Narrative. Thank you for being with us today for this webinar to discuss this important and somber anniversary. As you know, this is the part where I partake in the time-honored Washington tradition of filibustering for a few minutes as we wait for everyone to join the Zoom room. So again, thank you all. Thank you for being with us. I will introduce my esteemed guests in just a moment. But I'm watching the numbers of the participants slowly tick up. So we'll give that just one more minute and then jump right in. So thank you, everybody, for being with us and for your patience. Hello, Noam. And goodbye, Noam. Okay. Um, Again, hello, welcome. I'm Hadar Susskind. I'm the president and CEO of New Jewish Narrative. I am joined today by two very esteemed guests, my colleagues and board members, Letty Cottin Pogrebin and Sam Norich. I think those of you who have been involved with our organization and our organization's history certainly all know Letty and Sam and their long history of leadership roles, both at APN and Amenu, but also Letty, so many, starting Ms. Magazine, of course, and so many roles in the women's movement, Sam for so many years at the Forward and other voices and places within the Jewish community. I really couldn't be joined by two better guests today, so thank you both for being with us.
Good to be here.
Yeah, we are here on November 4th because today, shockingly to me, I got to be honest, is the 30th anniversary of the day that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. It's shocking both because I can't believe it's been 30 years, I'll be honest, but also because of how fresh and how painful that still feels. And it's shocking when as I do every year on this date, sort of stop and take stock of our work and our world and where we are in our efforts to build toward peace and build toward that better future that we aspire to. And to believe that it has been 30 years from what in many ways was the high peak and all of the challenges that we have faced since then. So I'm going to kick us off and take a minute to talk about that day, and then each of you can do so. And then what we really want to talk about is, not to just sit here and sort of reminisce, but to really look at how it impacted American Jewish political and organizational life. Because, of course, it impacted Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, but it impacted those of us here greatly and quite directly as well. I was a soldier at the time. And on November 1995, I was in the IDF. And I had the very, very weird and surreal experience of being an active duty soldier. But as a lone soldier, my parents lived in the US. I was actually here in the United States visiting on November 4th. So it was this, for me, extremely odd experience. I was at my parents' house. My parents are Shomer Shabbat, and it was, of course, Shabbat. So the phone rang at their house, which it never rings there on Shabbat. And we all sort of made faces at each other and said, I don't know, it's a telemarketer or whatever. And then a minute later, it rang again. And then when it rang a third time, I said, okay, I'm going to answer the phone because something weird is going on. And it actually was friends from Israel calling, looking for me to tell me, because it was, of course, before the days of smartphones and instant information. And I think like many people, I originally, my first thought was that it was a Palestinian who had assassinated him, not another Israeli Jew. And as that information came out, I spent a very, very strange day with my family, then a day here in Washington before I could fly back to Israel and get back to my unit, because even with understanding that it had been an Israeli Jew who did it, there was still, for me, certainly, and for people who were in the army at the time, great fears that this was going to lead to immediate armed conflict of one kind or the other. And that day and its ramifications, I think, we didn't see that war or conflict immediately, but we've seen it for 30 years since then. And we continue to live I think, in the shadows and the echoes of that day in many ways. All right, I will stop my rambling and Letty turn to you and ask you first, a little bit about that day. And again, as I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, Letty was National Chair of Americans for Peace Now at this time. And I know I'd love to hear you, Letty, talk a little bit about the day, but also about your experience in that role at that time, the Oslo time with the Clintons and Rabin and Arafat. And then we'll come to Sam too.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm glad to be with everyone. So it is a very sad day. And just as I remember exactly where I was when JFK was shot and when RFK was shot and when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot, this was a fulcrum moment in my life and I'll never forget it. Although it was a very ordinary Shabbat for me because I'm not Shomer Shabbat and I was at the theater, came home from the theater and my husband looked as if there was a death in our family. He was glued to the set and he almost couldn't get the words out because I came in very excited about I had seen Masterclass, which was about Maria Callas. And I had gone with my cousin who I hadn't seen in a long time. And I was just full of my day. And who knew what was going on in the world because we didn't have cell phones. And when he told me, I burst out in tears. And I honestly can't remember what we did that day or how we dealt with it. Um, but I do know, looking back, that I thought it was going to change everything, and it did.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense that we were on such uh, a clear kind of horizontal track. I won't say it was, the uphill or downhill, but it just seemed to be peace was uh, about to come, and I suddenly knew that was it. It was over because he was the only one who had all the bona fides to pull this off. He was the guy who broke arms. He was the hero. He was the pioneer generation. He was the kind of rumbly voiced, inscrutable, and you had confidence in him. And now he was gone. And of course, the great shock was that he was killed by a Jew.
Yeah. Sam, tell me, take a minute or two to tell us about the day, but then go right in. I mean, I'd love to hear from both of you. Again, I was, personally in a different spot. Also about like what was the American Jewish response and the organizational response like?
Well, let's wait till Sam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sam.
We'll get to the organizational response in a few minutes, but to go back to November 4th, 95, I was at a Labor Zionist Alliance Midwest conference at some godforsaken motel on Route 80 in Indiana. And you'll maybe remember that the Labor Zionist Alliance was two iterations before the formation of New Jewish Narrative. New Jewish Narrative, of course, is a merger of the Americans for Peace Now and Amenu. Labor Zionist Alliance was the predecessor to Amenu.
Yeah.
So I remember being at a session in that morning, that Saturday morning, and then taking a nap and waking up at like 2:30, and people were beside themselves. And I grabbed someone and said, "What's happened?" And they said, "Rabin, he's been assassinated." And um, it, uh, the the Yiddish term is "it got dark before my eyes." Uh, I had this foreboding feeling that what had been possible was no longer possible. And I have to say that I didn't have a lot of confidence in Shimon Peres's ability to pull it off, to continue the path that Rabin had embarked on. Rabin had been a gruff figure. I had actually met him like almost 2 decades earlier, um, when he came to New York to actually in 1972, more than 2 decades earlier, um, when he was the Israel ambassador to the United States, and he had spoken at a General Assembly of the Council of Jewish Federations. He was the keynote speaker at the big Saturday night dinner. And this was in November 72. This was 2 days after the general election that Nixon had won. I had been working as director of Young Jews for McGovern Shriver. And of course, Rabin had let it be known, no secret, that he supported Nixon and Jews should support Nixon. And we organized a demonstration to complain about Rabin's position. And the Council of Jewish Federations people had tried to suppress it and keep us out of the hall.
Some things don't change, yeah.
What?
Said some things don't change, yeah.
Right. But as soon as Rabin saw us, he said like this, and he called us up to the dais, and he said, "You want to talk? Come to Max Fisher's suite right after this is over." And we thought we'd spend a half hour speaking with him. It turned out to be a 2.5 hour engagement. He began by denying that he had supported Nixon. And after 2.5 hours, he said, you know, McGovern would have sold us down the river. Nixon will also sell us down the river. But when Nixon does it, I'll be able to go into the White House and say, remember who helped you with the Jews? So, I mean, he spoke his mind. He was not into diplomatic language.
Right.
He said things the way he felt them, the way he understood them. And I think that's what Israelis responded to. That's what made him so popular. He could offend people. He offended lots of people close to him, but he told the truth as he saw it. And
Right.
when the truth for him became enough, we need to have a peace settlement. It influenced a lot of people in Israel. I'm speaking from Jerusalem now. It influenced a lot of people in Israel, and it influenced a lot of people in America. And I'll never forget that afternoon and, feeling the setting on of darkness.
Right. I met him once, also in Jerusalem. It was, I was with a very small delegation of women who had been invited, 1976, who had been invited to Jerusalem on the cuff. I mean, on the on the credit card of the State Department of Israel, the Foreign Office of Israel. And we were invited because we had organized a petition here objecting to the fact that the UN Women's Conference, the first UN Women's Conference, had passed a resolution not about women, not about women's poverty or women's hunger or women's discrimination against women or violence against women, but Zionism is racism. And it was at that point, Zionism was not in the least bit racist, in my opinion. I have a little bit of problems denying that nomenclature at the moment. But at that time, we were gifted with this trip. And so there were 12 of us, and we went to see him. We went to see Gold. She was no longer prime minister, obviously, but both of them were extremely depressing because they were so dismissive of feminism. Both of them were dismissive. He gave us like 5 minutes and it was totally pro forma. And we felt, dissed, and we felt, why are you giving us this trip if you're not going to honor us in some way with kind of a particular kind of acceptance of our grievances, and zero. We were offered a meeting with Paris, who is sort of very much an up and comer on his coattails. At least that was how it was presented to us. And we refused because had been so debilitated and demoralized that we decided instead to go to a consciousness raising group in Haifa that had been organized by Marsha Friedman, who was the head of Ezrat Nashim, which was a women's party at the time.
Huh.
Golda, I might add, said something so awful to us. We came in and we said, we're here because thank you very much for this trip, but we're here because we're really concerned as women and Jews in the United States and in Israel about the lack of progress on. And then we had this little list, and she said, women and Jews, she said, then you have two insoluble problems. Who needed to hear that?
There you go.
Anyway, you used the word, I think, gruff about Rabin. I really found him quite inscrutable. When I later got to know Paris a little bit, because I was very good friends with Colette Avital, who was the New York Consul General during the Clinton years, which is when I was president of Americans for Peace Now, 92 to 96. I think of them as the halcyon years because everything looked like it was coming up roses. 1992 was proclaimed the year of the woman in the United States Congress. We suddenly flooded the Congress with women after we'd had a paucity of female concentration. And then we had Clinton with a good agenda and not yet any besmirchment by sexual offenses. And so and in terms of just, there had been the Madrid conference in 1991, which it was an absolutely incredible, almost more unbelievable as Oslo. And I have to say, we'll jump ahead, I guess, to 1993. September 13th, 1993 was almost as exciting to me as my marriage, the birth of my children. I mean, I couldn't believe that I was actually sitting on the White House lawn watching what I had worked for. At that point, I had been active in the Israel-Palestine issue for about only 8 years. And here it is. You work really hard and you end up on the White House lawn with a handshake. It sort of was an affirmation of the activist life, Who knew?
Well, I'm going to take that and step us back a little bit. Like I said, I was there at the time, otherwise engaged. But one of the things I want us to dig into a little bit is, I guess, starting with kind of the organizational, institutional responses in Jewish community. Again, you guys can tell me otherwise, but I think on that day and in those immediate days, obviously everyone was horrified, everyone was grieving. Feeling like we were so close, right? We were in the Oslo process. We all thought we were getting there. And how that moved, starting with the 90s, starting in the mid 90s, going into those next elections, Perez and then Netanyahu and et cetera. And we don't have to do it, moment by moment, but like just holding that up over here and then holding up where we are in terms of Jewish organizational life here. And how did the Rabin assassinations change that path? Sam?
First, I'll look back to an incident in 1994, before the assassination. I had been working on a study of how the institutional relationship between Israel and American Jewry had been changing and was being proposed to be changed, and really paying attention to Yossi Beilein's proposals at the time to abolish the Jewish Agency, to replace it with an institution that would raise all the same money from the United States through UJA, but would use that money to bring young American Jews to Israel, to give them a firsthand experience of what Israel really was like. And that became Birthright. I was working pretty closely with Beilin at the time. And I remember him on a visit to New York saying to a small group of us, imagine we're going to be able to drive to Rome. It was palpable to him. It was so clear, so near. The institutional consequences were devastating from the next day.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, we're not talking about something that started to happen a year, 4 years later.
Well, tell me about the next day.
Can I just say what happened the day of the signing? Because then the next day is going to sound all the more appalling. The day of, immediately after the signing, we all repaired to the executive office building, or whatever that building is called, right next to the White House. And all the Jewish machers were congratulating each other. I mean, all these people who were putting down any peace initiative prior to Oslo and prior to getting in on this, suddenly they're in on this humongously historic signing. But they were making deals. They were, doing, transatlantic cable and water desalination. And they were doing deals for exchanges and conferences, and business people were muttering about investments. So now, Sam, you say what the next day after the assassination was. I'm talking about September 13, 1993, and you're switching right to November 5th, right?
Exactly. I think it was November 5th that Colette Avital, as Letty said, the consul general at the time, Colette Avital called for the New York Jewish community to observe a shloshim a month later, the end of the 30-day mourning period. And initially it was to be the UJA Federation. Very soon thereafter, it became the President's Conference and UJA Federation and other organizations organizing an event at Madison Square Garden for December 30th. Well, to refresh my memory, I went back to J.J. Goldberg's book, Jewish Power.
Mm.
And particularly, he had finished writing the book when Rabin was assassinated, but it hadn't yet been published. And he wrote an epilogue completely addressing what happened immediately in the aftermath. He describes how the Zionist Organization of America, in the person of Mort Klein, called for, Colette had announced that Shimon Peres would be coming for the December 10th commemoration. And Mort Klein called for the President's Conference to invite a representative of the right in the Knesset to also speak. And Colette got up and said, Peres is not a representative of the left. He's the prime minister.
Right.
But that was the whole point.
Well, at that
Mort did not accept the legitimacy of the government of Israel.
Right. And Mort was at that time, Sam, considered Attila the Hun. He's now inside the tent big time.
Yeah.
It's such you talk about an arc,
Yes.
he was a kind of laughable figure way out there, spouting, just a tiny step away from Kahana.
Yeah.
But something else about that organizing for that event was we were told that we would have to sit still for the fact that no woman's voice could be on the stage. Can you imagine?
Initially, it was to be Barbara Streisand. She was not available
because of Koli Shah, because the voice of a woman is
exactly. But Miri Aloni, who had sung the peace song at the demonstration where Rabin had been assassinated. She was available, and they wanted to bring her,
Of
and
course.
the Orthodox said no. Um,
I want to say one thing for the Orthodox, and that is that Orthodox here were being really cruelly and unfairly scapegoated. Many of them decried what happened and
Absolutely.
condemned what happened and disavowed any attachment to that ethos or that ideology, and they were kind of scapegoated as a group, and I felt we needed to, speak out against that.
That definitely happened, and we did speak out against that.
Yeah.
And JJ, in his epilogue, goes into fine detail about the dynamics of preparing for that December 10th memorial. He points out that the organized community had managed to bring together many more people than could fit into Madison Square Garden on previous demonstrations, but those were always demonstrations against people who were persecuting Jews. Here, it was to be a demonstration against a Jew who had murdered the Israeli prime minister. And the fact that he was a chassid of uh, rabbis on the West Bank in Judea and Samaria who had labeled Rabin a
A Rodef.
I wrote no. Well, yes, he was accused of betraying the Jewish cause in that he agreed to return
Right.
conquered land that God had promised to the Jewish people.
And the Dean Rodef says that you can pursue
Right.
a pursuer and kill him. So
Right.
the
So
rabbis had been actually counseling that, and there had been demonstrations, big, huge demonstrations on the right in Jerusalem, with posters having Rabin dressed in a keffiyeh or in an SS uniform. So I
Right.
mean, the ground
That
was being set.
yeah,
that took place in October of '95,
Right.
and it was a demonstration that lasted for hours,
And
and Bibi Netanyahu and other Likud leaders did not say word one against these manifestations. Um, the the way it evolved was that 3 days before the memorial, the Zionist Organization of America and the National Council of Young Israel placed a full page ad in the New York Times calling on people to boycott the memorial event as they were going to do.
wow.
And uh, the organized community on the right did not participate. However, uh, Madison Square Garden was filled with people who were there to grieve. And among them were 30% of that crowd were Orthodox Jews
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
who had come in spite of the exhortations of their leaders.
Right.
wow.
Right.
So two quick things. First of all, I was remiss in my housekeeping at the beginning. I put it in the chat, but I remind everybody, if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom, not the hand raising, not anything else. You can use the Q&A button and I will get to as many of those as we can. One of the questions I wanted to ask you both is, I know, the process, you were, Sam, and both of you were talking about Rabin coming to the US at various years, that he at some point in the kind of early mid 90s came to the US to talk to the conference and to others about support for the Oslo process and
Right.
trying to build that. And that's the genesis story of Israel Policy Forum, which was formed out of some of those meetings when he felt like he wasn't getting as much support from as many organizations, although I'm sure some were supporting. And again, if I look at that that 30-year arc of he came here at the time asking for support. Sure, you know, it was Sam, I don't know where we were. What was it in the Amenu previous organizational history, what it was called then?
Labor Zionist Alliance.
LZA then in midnight. So LZA and APN, I'm sure, were supportive, but not that many other organizations were. IPF came out of that process. I mean, we've seen all the years of, you know, those organizations, the pushback from the right. And then frankly, we've seen, you know, organizations starting with J Street, but then even if not now, and JVP and further left organizations who've come out of that. Again, just thinking about that transition of the Israeli prime minister coming here, asking for support for peace versus what we see in most of these past 30 years when the Israeli prime minister comes here. Tell me a little bit more about like your view of that arc.
Well, for me, I mean, it was always kind of astonishing that AIPAC and the Conference of Presidents were supposed to support the government that was in power. But very often they were not in favor of the government that was in power. AIPAC did a lot of pushback early on in the 90s against, after Madrid, against normalization, against any peace efforts. And they were pretty overt about it, which you kind of haven't heard that since. AIPAC, for example, when under H.W. Bush, when Baker and Bush were pressuring Israel, you know, in terms of you want your money for Soviet Jews, which there was $10 billion, I think, or $10 million or some huge, no, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was for resettlement of Soviet Jews, and the loan, it was a loan guarantee.
It was $400 million, but yeah.
400 million, thank you. Okay, yeah. The numbers are not my forte, but I certainly do remember the pressure. It was astonishing that the US government would pressure Israel. That had never happened before. So there it was under, and what was it, 91, I believe. And they succeeded. I mean, well, they didn't succeed forever, but they succeeded at the time. The Madrid conference did go forward. It was quite historic, and it sort of broke the ice in a very big way. And here you had a government literally conditioning aid on a freeze on settlements, something we've all tried to do several times since, certainly at APN.
Still doing that, yes.
Yeah, so for me, the astonishment has been how our organizations, our umbrella organizations, which supposedly represent all of us on our end, and are, you know, sworn to support the elected government of Israel, did not do so. In the case of Rabin, when he and Yossi and Paris were, you know, those were, Colette was very, very involved in that. And in fact, Colette brought Yossi out to our Fire Island house. I'll never forget this because Yossi Balin appeared in a bathing suit and black business socks and black business shoes, which was quite a funny sight. And at that point,
we were going there. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and at that point it was you know, it was after September 13th, so we were in a very celebratory mood. And I said, Yossi, we saw you so many times. How did you know, how could you keep a secret like that? He said, you mean I forgot to tell you what I was doing? You know, with that accent of his very dry humor. But it was the resistance that I saw when I described to you the kind of zeal with which all the machers were making deals. They suddenly saw that, you know, you could benefit from peace, which is something we've kind of been trying to convey, that peace is the best form of security, peace is the best form of, you know, stabilizing an economy. And we saw it disappear. And the you know, the kind of idolatry for the right-wing fervor, it seems to have shoved off the stage any of those epiphanies of that era.
Yeah, yeah. The Israeli right actually sent people to lobby Congress against the government of Israel. This was the Gang of Four, headed by Carmon. And uh, I mean, this was something that the left never allowed itself to do. And I think the assassination sort of opened the floodgates. Um, uh, and uh, it well, there were in fact attempts to create a peace process after Rabin's assassination.
Yeah, yeah.
Under Barak,
And
under Olmert.
Why
Right,
River was a very promising moment. Yeah,
right,
in
right,
98.
right. And um, uh, I mean, I think I think these issues really get decided not in Washington but in Israel, and we know what course the events have taken since then.
Well, I think what we see that is perhaps most disheartening is a capacity to demonize the left now. And when I'm in Israel, I haven't been in Israel for quite a while, but when I'm in touch with people in Israel, I'm astonished by how cowed the left feels, how sidelined the left feels. And I remember during our heyday years, when, as I said, everything seemed to be coming up roses, we felt that we in Peace Now, that was Shalom Achshav actually there, and us, APN, that we were the outside agitators who had our counterparts inside the Knesset. So we felt legit. But after the assassination, somehow or other, the capacity to ridicule and delegitimate any expression of the left, the feeling that even, the people on the inside were somehow or other fifth column, um, when Naomi Chazan, who was the head of New Israel Fund in Israel, appeared on billboards on the highways in Israel with a rhinoceros horn out of her head. And I forgot what it said in Hebrew. Do you remember, Hadar? What it said something about, being
That's something horrible. I can't remember the
like a
specific.
traitor,
Yeah.
an animal, a traitor. That stuff got to be legitimated, and it coarsened the discourse, and it infused the politics with a kind of toxicity that I think has only gotten worse. But it was, and now Yigal Amir and his family, they have a coterie of real admirers. I think they have like a Facebook page or a following. It
Sure.
it's just
So I
amazing to me that we have defied our values, in such a way that some Jews are unrecognizable to me as acting Jewish in any way.
Let me, Sam, I know you want to add, but let me ask you guys one other thing to add into this. So I spoke to both of my children today, who are about the age that I was then, right? So they were both born after Rabin was assassinated, and being my children, they know who he is. They get the general story, but they don't have that experience. And when I think about my experience, people my generation, right? I literally moved there and went to join the IDF during the Ozil years to say, okay, someone still has to do this for these last couple of years till we get over the hump, right? Till we make peace. And as you guys were talking about, lived that experience of feeling like we were close, we were getting there. People were, making their real estate deals. I was not in those rooms then, but doing whatever it was they were doing there. And of course, my kids or anybody that generation doesn't have that experience of Israel. They have no experience of believing that Israel is deeply committed to try to make peace. They have no experience of Israel, talking about ending the occupation or, increasing civil rights and civil liberties in the country. All of those things that were building in the early 90s. It wasn't, I mean, Oslo, of course, was the big one, but it was also, the basic laws on civil rights and civil liberties in the country were improving. And if we talk to people who are, certainly in their 20s, their 30s, most of them even in their 40s now, if you talk about what they remember, they don't have that experience. They don't have that memory. How do we what would you say to them? How do you get them to understand that that potential, not only that that history was real, because that, that's a history lesson, but that that potential exists in the country?
Sam, I'm so glad this is your question.
Well, it's both of you, but go ahead.
Uh, Contrary to common belief, I think the left is not dead in Israel, at least the left as we understand it. The pro-democracy, the pro-peace, the pro-sharing the land, which was Ben-Gurion's call in 47, 48. Uh, this past Saturday night,
Yeah.
I was part of 150,000 people in Rabin Square in Tel Aviv who gathered to remember and to support spokespeople for the pro-peace camp, which is really the security camp of Israel, in my view. People like Yair Golan, people like Tzipi Livni. I mean, they gave forceful speeches. All the leaders of the opposition gave forceful speeches applauded by this 150,000 people. Israel has in fact seen more resistance to autocracy than America has seen. I acknowledge, I respect and admire the fact that 7 million people turned out for no kings in 2,600 cities and towns. But when was the last time we did this? Here, it's being done every Saturday night for years. And the manifestations of opposition to this government are clear.
Yes, but mostly they're based on, civil rights issues for Jews.
Yes.
So
There
they're
were
not peace oriented. They're not demanding, back to negotiations, figure out a way, sit down at the table, and they're standing still for like resolution, the UN resolution that just came through that said what's it called, a draft revolution. I just thought
You're talking about
granting
the
US
Iraq
and partners a broad mandate to govern Gaza. Where's Palestine in this? How can we possibly imagine a peace without the other part? What Rabin used to say, or maybe it was Paris, is, we're not going to be sitting down to negotiate with Denmark. We have to sit down with the people who are our neighbors. And
Yeah.
I don't see that happening, Sam. In fact, I still see it being sort of sidelined. I remember when Shav
Shafril.
was running, and when Meirav Michaeli were running, because I was following the women candidates, and they got into the Knesset, and they really weren't running on a peace platform. It was not up there on their agenda. And he kept saying, it was the cottage cheese revolution. Remember that was the name of it? It was all about economics.
In 2011.
Yeah. So, and what I mourn is the lack of fervor, the lack of a sense of possibility, the lack of the capacity to even imagine peace. That I think that's why I was glad you got the question, because I don't know how to motivate people who have not seen. I mean, I tell my young people when I speak in those kinds of gatherings about another of the most euphoric moments of my life as an activist was when I flew to the signing on the Arava Desert between Jordan and Israel, the peace treaty that was signed the year after Oslo, in October, I think it was, 1994. And
Right.
there was two moments that I will never forget. One was when two little girls representing the granddaughters of Arafat and not Arafat, of Hussein and Rabin, who had fought the 1967 war, and all the people who died in that war. These little girls brought bouquets of flowers each to the other side. So a Jordanian girl gave it to Rabin, and an Israeli girl gave it to King Hussein. And after that, they released on the Arava Desert, net net bags full of balloons, blue and white, and then the colors of the Jordanian flag. You'll have to remind me what it is: green, white, and red, maybe, and black, or some combination. And all those balloons came out of separate bags, and then they floated up and they mingled. And everybody was crying.
That's very good advance work.
Yeah, it really was. I don't know how you get that kind of euphoric kind of we can do this feeling in young people today when there isn't a sliver of light right now.
I think there's more than a sliver.
Okay.
I I also want to remind us that by the end of the 90s, we had seen an intifada and a lot of blood on the floor, and the people who did not want a peace settlement on both sides have really made the history in much of the last 30 years. And that certainly includes the murder of Rabin. And I mean, I had a professor in college who described this kind of situation as an antagonistic collaboration.
Right.
By people in both the extremes of both sides, who absolutely rejected the possibility of sharing the land, of living in peace with the other side in the same land. And I think there are people in Israel and there are people in Palestine who are eager to live in peace with one another. And the leaders actually the leaders on the Palestinian side in the West Bank are people who are prepared to live in peace. They have, in fact, prevented most of the terrorism that could have come from Hamas on the West Bank. And Hamas is a death cult. Hamas is a group that will never accept Israel, and they simply need to be defeated. And that's what Israelis have largely been doing. And I can't blame them for that. I can blame the government for the way in which this war was conducted.
Right.
But
I guess the answer to for young people to get involved and to understand what's happening, they need to understand what's happening. They have been, by the organized Jewish community or the mainstream organizations, they've been prevented from learning what's happening because people are afraid to let the other side be heard. So Palestinians haven't been heard. The most moderate Palestinians are not allowed in Jewish spaces.
That's exactly, Letty, to use your phrase, the sliver of light I was going to talk about is starting with there and bringing it here. We have been joined multiple times in lots of ways by our friends Aziz Abu Sara and Maoz Inon, right, who have come from the worst darkness and bringing light to us. And I think, those guys, for me, are the inspiration, but there are more. There's,
combatants for
But
peace.
there's the movements, there's our friends at Shalom Achshav, but then there's combatants for peace, and then there is, Team
Federation.
B'Yachad, standing together. So many different efforts, of folks that are working together. And I think such an important part of our work, yes, organizationally, but also more broadly, is helping elevate those voices and helping
Right.
that light so that people can see possibilities here. Because those younger generations who have never experienced that feeling of, okay, we're not there yet, but we're doing the right things, we're getting there, and have only seen, again, because of what you were talking about, Letty, they don't hear Palestinian peacemakers, and they frankly, unless they go out of their way, don't hear Israeli peacemakers either, and they've only seen a government that has obviously not been that. And so I think it is just an essential element of the work that, again, we obviously organizationally, but also more broadly do, is to help light that path.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I see we have quite a good audience out there.
We've got a lot of questions, including quite a few that are just really appreciation for the two of you. So first of all, I'll just add my own to that for joining us and sharing this. One of the questions is that I think is interesting is it says, how to explain that many Jewish people in our generation, it says boomers from the person who's asking this, also seem to support an anti-Israel agenda as if they did not live through the Oslo process.
Well, the simple answer is that they didn't, or they were too young to tune in during the Oslo process. For Israelis, the front line ran through Gaza. For American Jews, the front line ran through our families. And, the younger generation has simply not had the same experience that the older generation has had. And, can't fault them for that they weren't born 40 years earlier. It's just a fact. And, we remember 67 as a miracle.
Yeah.
And in some ways it was
a second Nakba.
Yeah, it was.
Mm.
It was so different on the two sides.
I see a question that I'd like the answer to.
Go for it, Letty.
Edward Dollard asks, how is this day observed in Israel at all? Is it a national holiday?
Well, Sam started mentioning it, but Sam, you were there. Why don't you start?
Yeah.
Well, it's not a national holiday, but as I said, 150,000 people did get together in Rabin Square in Tel Aviv, and 150,000 in a nation of 10 million. Multiply that by 330 times or 33 times, and you've got the equivalent in the United States. It's huge, and it's very much on the consciousness of people. It's, of course, lead articles in all the newspapers. It's the subject of television coverage extensively. It's very much on the mind of Israelis that 30 years makes it's a milestone, it's a marker, and for me, in thinking about how things are going to develop in Israel and how things are going to develop in the United States, my focus is on the next election.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And the hope that people both here and in America will pull back and say, oh my God, we were near the abyss, we've got to pull back.
I want to Go ahead, Letty, and then I'll.
I just saw another question that,
Oh, wait, don't move on yet then.
okay.
So, it was interesting. Again, obviously, we're doing this today. Many of our colleagues at other American Jewish organizations have also, held events, webinars, done different things. I was actually a little bit surprised how little mention this anniversary has gotten more broadly in America. I
Me
felt
too.
like,
Hmm.
5 years ago, uh, we did an APN event honoring Rabin on the 25th anniversary. And there were a lot. I remember talking to members of Congress about it, talking to other people. I felt like the anniversary got a lot more coverage and attention than I've otherwise seen. I don't think I've seen anything uh, from anybody outside of Jewish organizational world here today. But I think it goes into some of the other questions that folks have asked and some of what we've been talking about how do we build on the Rabin legacy today? How do we use it with people of all generations to, uphold the work for peace and the need to do this with the understanding, Letty, like you were saying before, that, we're not making peace with Denmark, right?
Right.
That peace is, difficult, and peace is made with people who
Yeah.
are your enemies.
I think I know this is an odd thing to say, but I think his toughness uh, allows people who are hardline now or tending toward more hardline now. Like if he could do it, this is a man who, was a founder of the part of the founding generation. He was a war hero. He was tough. And if he could work his way through to the recognition that peace is the best form of security, is the only real form of security, we ought to be able to sell that message. I always am faulting Democrats and pro Israel Zionists, liberal Zionists, why we don't just hammer home one message for a while, the way that the right wing does. We flit around. We are so intellectual. We want to cover all of our bases. We have, Roman numeral one, big A, little one, all of that, all the way down. We want to cover everything because we know it. You know, we go deep. But really, we need that message. You can be tough. You can have been a soldier. You can have been a right winger, and you can still make that arc. You know, and I wanted to, I know we have only a minute left, but
Yeah.
Jesse Kleiman asked an intriguing question. How do you explain that many Jewish people in our generation, boomers, also seem to support an anti-Israel agenda as if they did not live through Oslo? The point is, it's not an anti-Israel agenda. It's an anti-government. It's an anti-right-wing Ben Gvir, Smotrich kind of government. It's an anti-Netanyahu, steeped in fraud and all kinds of criminal charges against him, kind of anti-government, not anti-Israel. In fact, the whole notion of, you know, what it is to be pro-Israel for me is to kind of realize what's in the Declaration of Independence, which couldn't be clearer. It's in fact better than ours in the sense that it includes gender along with, national origin and race and religion and everything else when it talks about equality. So it seems to me we need to kind of maybe go back to the Martin Luther King Jr. formula and infuse a little more of real Jewish values, the best of Jewish values, um, and certainly the best of what Israel's visionary founders had in mind when they signed that constitution, that declaration.
Yeah. Thank you. Sam, closing words?
Sometimes things look just too bleak. We who know a little bit of history know that we've lived through worse times than this. And I believe with a complete faith that we'll live through this as well and come out with hope, with an ability to feel like, oh, yeah, we are having an influence on the course of events. Don't give up,
This is why I love having you around, Sam. You are such a, you see the glass as definitely more than half full.
Well, listen, I want to thank you both for being here today. I want to thank you both for all of the support and the work that you are continuing to do, and for sharing this history and all of these with us. So thank you. Thank you, everybody who joined us, and we will see you all another time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javerim, and stay healthy.
Thanks. Bye,
Shalom,
everybody.
Haver.
Exactly.